Compliance Committee meeting of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents will now come to order. A few items real quickly. We have a Regent Shu joining us by phone. Regent Shu, are you there?
Yes, hello.
All right, well, thank you for joining us. And we'd also like to announce that in our agenda review with the Vice Chair and Chief Auditor Klatt, there was a request to alter the order of the items on our agenda, and that would be to move item number 4, the External Quality Assurance Review Report, which is for discussion, moving it from the 4th spot up to the 1st spot, and then moving the remaining items down 1 through 3 after number 4, and then followed by number 5. Are there any concerns or objections by members of the committee to the change? Hearing none, we will make that change. And before we start with item 4, I would like to welcome and invite introductions from student representatives. Anthony Kahane, over here. Would you like to give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Hello. My name's Anthony Kahane. I'm a second-year graduate student in the Department of German, Nordic, Slavic, and Dutch. I study translation. I don't know if that's relevant to our purposes, but fun fact.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you. We'll put that in our pocket, and if we need some translation, we will call on.
We have him here.
Student Representative Kahane, thank you, and Spencer Basarich.
So I'm a senior at the University of Minnesota Duluth, where I study political science and communication.
Well, you have a...
And you said my name right, which is almost a first.
Well, thank you, and I've got good support in helping me figure these things out, and I would just point out that there's a high bar for UMD senior student representatives to the Board of Regents.
We can test that. It's kind of like...
Thank you. All right, without further ado, I will turn it over to Chief Auditor Klatt and Ms. Gilligan for item 4, the External Quality Assurance Review Report.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. And thank you for accommodating the change in the agenda. Linda Gilligan led the review team that did our external quality assurance review, and she also teaches at St. Cloud University, and she has class this morning. So she is here and then needs to scoot out and head up to St. Cloud to fulfill that commitment. So we're glad we could accommodate her schedule and our agenda. I want to just begin with a little background of the external quality assurance review and where that kind of fits into our audit practice. Our professional standards require that we have an external quality assurance review done every 5 years. And in preparation for that, as part of that process, the audit function itself does a very rigorous self-assessment of its practice and determines whether those practices are in fact in compliance with the professional standards. Upon completion of that self-assessment, which you received a report on in early January, you retain a group of typically other professional colleagues to come in and validate that review and provide assurance to organizational leadership and boards about whether you can continue to place reliance on the quality and competency of the audit work that's performed as it's performed in accordance with the standards. So that review has been completed. Ms. Gilligan led that review. She is the retired Chief Audit Executive for the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. She was joined by 3 colleagues from higher education, 2 from the Big Ten, 1 private, 1 public, and 1 from outside of the Big Ten as well. And they completed that review in late January, and she is here to communicate the results of that review to the committee. So, welcome, Linda. It's all yours.
Okay.
Team Leader Gilligan, take it away.
And thank you very much for accommodating my schedule this morning. I really appreciate it. Although I'm sure my students would like to sleep in, I said, no, I will be there. So Chief Auditor Klatt provided you with background about the review, and I would like to give you a bit more details about the process. They completed, of course, a self-assessment of their compliance with our auditing standards from the Institute of Internal Auditors, and also a code of ethics that we are required to follow. And I'm very pleased to be here representing our team of expert peer reviewers. As Gail said, we had Betty McPhillamy from Northwestern, retired CAE, Patricia Snopkowski from Oregon State, and also Julie Zamatis from University of Illinois. And I believe you received a copy of the report. Is that correct? Okay. So you've gotten a copy of our final validation report, which of course contains our opinion that we concurred with the Office of Internal Auditors' overall rating of generally conforms with the standards, which actually is the top rating that you can get. It doesn't sound that positive, but that's as good as it gets. I thought I would give you just a little bit more information about the validation efforts that we did. So some color commentary, if you will. So we received and were provided access to all of the self-assessment materials completed by the Office of Internal Audit. And this was quite extensive documentation because in assessing compliance with the standards, I think there's 52 standards. So they had documentation supporting their work on all of those standards. We also looked at a few work papers we were given access to. So we did a sample review of the work papers and also some limited testing looking at the compliance with the various standards. An important part of our review was not just looking at the documentation, but also speaking to many university leaders and representatives of the Board of Regents to get their feedback about the internal audit function here. And we also had the opportunity to meet with representatives from the external audit firm. So as we documented in our report, we concluded that the Office of Internal Audit maintained a very strong internal audit function. And that function provides valued assurance services to a really dynamic and complex institution here. The university is a very important public institution, and so it's important that you have a strong internal audit group to help protect the public interests. I also want to say that Chief Auditor Klatt is an exemplary leader of the internal audit function. She has managed through very significant staffing changes in the internal auditing group in recent years and has maintained the quality of the services provided by that group very effectively, and also done a great job developing staff. The Office of Internal Auditor staff are very professional, knowledgeable, and they've also successfully implemented technology in recent years that has helped to improve and strengthen their internal audit processes. I also wanted to comment on innovation as being a theme. People often don't think that internal auditors are innovative, but they can be, they should be, and the Office of Internal Audit is trying new things, such as SNAP reviews, which is a shorter, focused type of audit review that provides information to management more timely and more focused. So that is a very good best practice. In some organizations, not this one, but others, the audit staff and the chief auditor have a hard time getting a seat at the table because they don't have that credibility. And you want to have a seat at the table if you're in internal auditing, because you want to be there for all of the important conversations about initiatives and major things going on in the organization. That is not a problem here. The university leaders who we spoke to indicated that they very much valued Chief Auditor Klatt's participation in the key governance groups, such as the President's Cabinet. And not only does she have a seat at the table, or is in the room where it happens, if you will, university management considers Chief Auditor Klatt to be a trusted advisor who provides important perspectives and insights, but at the same time maintains her objectivity and independence, which is a very important attribute for a chief auditor. We had a couple of improvement opportunities that we mentioned in the report, just things to consider. Probably the most important one is staffing, paying attention to staffing and compensation of the auditors and how that's tracking with the market. I think I will stop there just to make sure that I have time to address any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you. And we'll have the report in the docket, and if you've had a chance to review it, I note that the generally conforms language, when I first read the report, sort of stood out to me, and then it dawned on me that if I could reach generally conforms to most expectations of things that I do in my life, I'd consider that a great success. So I'm very happy to see that we did so well. And I also want to thank the team for coming in. I know with the vice chair and I, in our discussions, we actually came away with a lot. And the expertise and experience that was represented by the team that you led, I appreciated that opportunity. So with that, I'll open it up to the committee for any questions or comments on the report. Regents Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, and this probably doesn't get them to the report itself, but to a comment you made in there, if I could ask. And just as background, I've had some concerns over my 3 years here on the board of how we compensate our folks at the university or in public institutions versus other public institutions like state of Minnesota or Dakota County or something. In your comments, you said that I think we were a little short-staffed and that we had to make sure we continued to pay good salaries to get people to come to work at the university in our audit functions and for Chief Auditor Klatt. Tell me how you compare the state legislative auditor or the state auditor's office and the personnel, the persons they have who make probably significantly less in monetary reimbursement. Are they not able to attract good auditors? Are they not able to attract anybody? You made comments that we have to, do you remember the comment you made in there?
Yes, of course.
Help me, are we just,
Sure.
at the state of Minnesota, are we just totally underpaying people, or aren't we getting the good folks, or they leave us right away, or what?
Ms. Gilligan.
Okay, so here's where I'm coming from, and I don't personally have information about the state legislative auditor's staff and their compensation levels and so on. What I'm looking at is that it's an extremely competitive market for people with these skill sets, internal auditing, risk assessment, and so on. Positions oftentimes are, go unfilled. So it's a low unemployment rate. It's a tight job market for people with these skill sets. I'm seeing that even students at St. Cloud State, where I teach, sometimes are getting job offers when they're sophomores before they've even graduated. So I'm sorry that I don't have information about the legislative auditors' salaries and how those compare to the University of Minnesota. I'm reacting to it's a tight job market, and in talking with my colleagues at different companies, it's a common theme that we have challenges filling these positions, especially people with auditing and the technology skills too. Those are the toughest positions to fill. So it's something that you need to pay attention to. And I'm sorry I'm unable to completely answer your question there.
Regents Sviggum?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ms. Gilligan, I appreciate that a lot, and I don't have the numbers with me today. I did a couple of years ago at a general board meeting, but I just found there is a market out there. And I know this doesn't get into your audit of generally conforms or does not conform, and we had a great rating, and I think that is absolutely wonderful. Thank you for what you and your team have done, and I suppose you were going to do it 5 years from now again. But there was just that one comment that I'm just always struck at me that others in the public sector, again, state of Minnesota legislative auditor, state auditor, have salaries that are generally significantly less. And, I don't know how they can keep their people or get good people. And yet, I think the legislative auditor and the state auditor are pretty good folks, and they have pretty good staffs.
Yeah,
That's my
sometimes,
perception.
just one other comment here. Sometimes government auditing positions have a little bit different focus. For example, they're looking at a particular program and compliance with the spending or the limits of the program. So sometimes it can be a little bit different focus. Here at the university, there are many different activities and complex matters that audit is involved in covering. So I don't know if that makes a difference in the salary structure or not.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Gilligan, right? Or
Gilligan.
Gilligan. It may, although I think in the case of the legislative auditor has pretty broad interests and programs that they do look at and audit. It was just a comment I caught in your report, and I don't know why I asked, other than everybody knows that I'm somewhat concerned over spending.
Thank you. And just to kind of bring it back in, and this is, Regents Sviggum brings up a very important concept, particularly in light of the fact that that was one of the areas that stood out in the report. And we've had an opportunity to visit with Chief Auditor Klatt about a position that she's having a difficult time filling. I don't want do you want to comment on that, or should we just continue on? I think that this would be something that would be important for this committee to get in front of it. Not just the issue of I think the very apt conversation that Regent Sviggum just commenced, but also the staffing levels. One of the conversations also stemming from a question that Regent Sviggum asked about specific programs, our capacity for reviewing the operation of programs as opposed to sort of the more objective analysis that the auditor's office currently does, more akin to like the legislative auditor versus what we've had in the past. But it's a staffing issue for an institution that is now over $4 billion a year in activity. So I think the Vice Chair and I we have an opportunity to visit with Chief Auditor Klatt and see if we can get that on an agenda in the not so distant future to get at some of those questions, which of course we would then owe to the report for having, I think, gotten us moving in that direction. Regent Hsu, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? All right. Hearing none, we will move on to the next item. And thank you very much, Ms. Gilligan, for your efforts and work and time, and hopefully the traffic will be quick to your class and take a winter survival kit. I think it's chilly out there today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to do the review. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
We'll now move to item 1, the external auditor report and review of completed audit work. This is also for discussion. Chief Auditor Klatt, do you want to give us a little heads up on this as our presenters have a seat?
Of course. So our partners from Deloitte are here to communicate with the committee the status of all the audit work they completed in the last year. They did a brief review. They did a similar review with the chair of the committee and the vice chair and some senior leaders earlier, but because of the change in the audit committee schedule for this year, this is the first time since the completion of the work that the committee has has come together for them to share this with the entire committee. And I will just say, not to take the wind out of their sails, but it is totally across the board really good news. So
Thank you. I welcome Sue Paulson, Katie Knudsen, and Judy Dockendorf. And who would like to lead? Or actually, why don't I just turn it over to the table and you guys can trade off as you need.
Good morning, Regent Rocha. Thank you for having us. I'm Katie Knudsen. I am our lead audit partner, for those of you that I have not met, for the University of Minnesota. As Chief Auditor Klatt indicated, we met with Regent Rocha and key executives of the university back in October. That's when we finalized our audit of the consolidated financial statements of the university. So we presented those results back then. We are here with you, and Judy will cover in a minute the remainder of what I will call our compliance-related audit work that we do at the university. We also, after Sue Paulson's presentation, are also going to present our audit plan for fiscal 2020. So we are working very closely with the university to accelerate the timing of our audit work. And so what we had historically presented to you in May, we're going to do in February. The university is working towards being prepared so that we can do our work and present to you in October. So really, looking to move up our work and get you timely information as it relates to the financial results of the university. I'll turn it over to Judy Dockendorf, who works with me, leads our work here at the university. She'll cover the results of our work. Then we'll turn it over to Ms. Paulson, and then I'll be back to talk about our plan.
Ms. Dockendorf.
Good morning. So I think should start around page 120 of your materials. But as Katie mentioned, we'll just work through the results of the 2019 audits and compliance work that we did. So as Katie mentioned, we issued our reports on the 2019 financial statements back in October. I believe you were issued a letter that summarized the results of those audits as well. We issued unmodified opinions on the financial statements and internal control for the university. Additionally, our audit scope included an audit of the Reminco, which is done by our Deloitte team in Bermuda. No issues noted there.
Warmer there than it is here.
And then the compliance work, which you should have copies of in your materials, which includes the federal audit, the federal compliance audit over dollars there, the Minnesota state examination over state grants, and then agreed upon procedures for the Twin Cities Athletics Department, which are all similar with reports that we had issued in the prior year as well. So you should have copies of those, and I'll highlight some of the findings there. Stepping back just a minute to the actual audit of the financial statements itself, we do, as we plan our audit procedures, focus on key estimates and judgments in the financial statements. And there were no changes in any significant accounting policies or judgments management made in the 2019 financial statements as compared to prior years. A couple of the focus areas that we did look at are management override of controls as well as the alternative investments. Management override of controls is a presumed risk for all audits that we do. It's required by our auditing standards, and so it's not indicative of anything we've identified specifically at the university, but required procedures that we have to do. And so we look at analytical reviews of the financial statements, we hold inquiries, we test journal entries, so we actually get a population of all entries that have been made to the financial statements, and we're able to run tests to say, do these look odd? Was an entry made on Christmas Day? Was an entry made by someone that shouldn't have made an entry? And we're able to focus and make specific selections to ensure that there was no management override of controls and management override of any estimates. And so we did not identify anything there, but it is a required procedure that we perform for all audits. Additionally, we focused on the investments balance. Obviously, that's a significant balance in the university's financial statements. We perform quite a bit of work there. We work with the Office of Investments Banking to understand the population of investments that the university has, the investment managers that they're working with, what controls do they have over those relationships, what the investment managers are looking to invest in. And then we perform procedures around the valuation of those investments. So we're looking to audited or unaudited financial statements of the individual investments themselves. We're doing price testing of those. We're doing testing of purchases and sales near the end of the year to ensure that all those investments are recorded at the appropriate values. And again, we identified nothing of concern and no issues in that testing. Here's a quick summary of the other services we completed related to fiscal 2019, and I will move into a couple slides related to each of these. So the Uniform Grant Federal Compliance Audit is required when entities receive more than $750,000 a year in federal expenditures. The university certainly exceeds that. In fiscal 19, there was just over $1.03 billion received in federal dollars for the university. This is pretty consistent with the level the university's been at for the last few years. But so we performed this audit, which involves identifying programs to test and then doing compliance work over that. And the university does continue to meet the qualification of a low-risk auditee, and this really just drives the amount of testing that we have to do. So a low-risk auditee, you just need to cover 20% of the total expenditures that the university would receive, which we certainly do exceed when we select our programs for testing. So in fiscal 19, we selected 5 programs for testing. Obviously, the large programs of research and development as well as student financial aid, those are part of our testing on an annual basis for the compliance audit. And then we had some smaller programs that were also tested this year. So this population of expenditures is subject to testing, so we're making anywhere from 25 to 50 to 60 selections of expenditures, ensuring that they were made for appropriate items, that they were paid appropriately after amounts were expended, that they meet the requirements of the grant agreements. And so through our testing, we were able to issue unmodified opinions on compliance for the federal audit. No significant deficiencies or material weaknesses were identified, and we did not identify any non-compliance or findings or questioned costs. So a good, clean audit opinion on the federal audits. Additionally, I mentioned the state work that we do. So the Minnesota Office of Higher Education requires an examination to be done. Here we're making selections of students that received state aid and ensuring that they were eligible for that aid that they received. It was given to them in the appropriate amount. And we actually do this for each of the campuses individually. So you'll see a campus report, 4 of them in your materials. And again, no findings were noted here related to this work. And then we actually only had 1 agreed upon procedures engagement in fiscal 19. So for the Twin Cities campus, we did our procedures over NCAA compliance. The NCAA actually issues a manual that all Division I institutions have to follow. And so we're going through and making selections over revenues, expenses, capital assets that's specific to the athletics department, debt that's specific to the athletics department, and making selections there to ensure that the accounting is in compliance with what the NCAA would outline. You can see we did have 1 exception around an equivalency value. This was corrected by the athletics department in December when it was brought up, and it did not change the equivalency limit the hockey team could be within. So no issues with compliance as it was brought up. It was corrected by the university, but because the agreed upon procedures are kind of a yes-no set of work that we do, because this exception was there, it is included in our report. But no concerns from us or the university related to that. And I'll maybe stop there, as there's just an appendix that just has a snapshot of the 2019 financial information if you have questions at all on the 2019 work.
Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Not seeing any. Regent Shu?
None here, Chair Rocha. Thank you.
Like to continue? Oh, Chief Auditor Klatt.
I just have one comment for the committee that the quality of the results of the audit are really notable. And that audit work and the underlying activities are carried out in a variety of areas within the institution. So it's just not one group that achieves these results, but groups in our accounting area, groups in our student finance area, groups in athletics. So I think you should all just be aware that it indicates the capabilities and competencies of a very broad range of staff within the institution, and I think that's really notable.
Chair Rocha, I would just add just two more things. Absolutely, Chief Auditor Klatt is exactly right. And I think the other thing that strikes me, just as I've worked with the university for a long time, is that the results have been sustained. So I would tell you that when we go other places, that's not necessarily the case. There are, generally higher degree of findings. So just to, put it in perspective, just from a period of time, these results have been sustained for quite a number of years. The other thing that I'll mention, and Ms. Gilligan mentioned it in her remarks, we met with her and her team to really talk about our work, to link that in with her assessment of Chief Auditor Klatt's department. And so we walked through that with her. We've known Ms. Gilligan for a really long time. We served the Federal Reserve. We've known her for more than 15 years. So was pleased to meet with her, and she really knows her stuff. So I was pleased to see that she was leading the work here.
Thank you. Ms. Knudsen, when you talk about, with your experience and the range of institutions that you've observed, when you talk about the quality, the level of success and the sustained success, how would you characterize? Do you have an opinion as to what leads to that? Is it a personnel matter almost exclusively? Is it systems? Is it some combination? What would you say is different about what we do that has allowed us to be successful this way?
Chair Rocha, a very good question. I would say you got to have sort of process and people, and then technology are all really important. The people in each of the groups that we work with know sort of their subject matter expertise when we talk about investments, which is one of our significant risk areas. The OIB is very well staffed in terms of the complexity of alternative investments and what that creates. Obviously, in the controller's office, process in terms of accumulating the information. It really, when you think about the complexity of this work, it's a very significant project to manage, and project management is important. Technology continues to evolve. Ms. Gilligan talked about, Chief Auditor Klatt and her team really leveraging technology. What I would like to see, over time is just continue to see more of that, because I think in addition to the high quality, I think that things could be done faster, which is what we've been talking about in terms of working towards accelerating the timeline. That to me is the opportunity. From a quality perspective, absolutely no concerns, but we really can continue to enhance technology at the university when it comes to sort of accounting and consolidation. And so that's something that we've been talking about for a period of time.
Thank you. Regents Sviggum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think being a low-risk auditee is a really good thing, and I think it comes from maybe our performance and our sustained performance that you talk about. Give me an idea of what that means if we were a high-risk auditee. Tell me what's the difference. What's the difference in your involvement? Who is a high-risk auditee? I don't have. Is St. Thomas or St. Olaf or Mankato State? It's not State of Mankato or whatever. Give me a high-risk auditee so I know who we're better than.
Chair Rocha, I'll let Judy Dockendorf cover sort of what's the difference. I don't know that we can share who's high and who's not, but we certainly can provide perspective of what causes high risk and what that means from an audit perspective.
Chair Rocha, Regent Sviggum. So to be a low-risk auditee, you had to have no material non-compliance, no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, and you need to have filed your single audit or this this federal audit timely. So really, because there's been no findings for the university, everything's filed timely, they continue to qualify as this low-risk auditee. So those that may fall into the high risk would be people who have material noncompliance, if they have material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in their internal control over the federal compliance, that moves them to that higher risk auditee or not a low risk. And then it just requires you to test additional expenditures. So we actually, if I went back, we're testing 93% of the total expenditures. We only need to test 20%. We do test additional amounts so we can cover research and development and financial aid. But that's really the difference from an audit perspective, is that there's additional requirements to cover a larger sample of the population if you're high risk versus low risk.
Regent Sviggum.
Mr. Chairman, if I heard you correctly, we're actually testing more than we need to test
Yes.
because we are a low-risk auditee?
Yes, we could potentially not test we could not test research and development, but the university has wanted that to continue to be a focus area. We do feel that on an annual basis, we need to test student financial aid, as that is relied on for the Minnesota examination that's done on the state grants. So that one would stay in, but there would be potential to not test research and development on an annual basis if that was a route we wanted to go.
And Regents Sviggum, let me add one thing. We have talked historically with this committee about moving the research and development cluster on a rotation, call it every other year, every three years. To date, there hasn't been a large appetite to do that. But certainly that is something that we're comfortable with and we certainly can explore. The financial aid is something that we need for other aspects of our work, and so that's not one that we could, but research and development is certainly something we have talked with both management and the committee about over the years.
Ms. Paulson, did you?
Yeah, if I could, Chair Rocha and Regent Sviggum, in addition to what the external auditors would be required to do if you are a high-risk auditee, the federal agencies would then also engage some sort of additional monitoring, as well as our subrecipients, as well as our prime funders that get subawards, or that give the university subawards from their federal grants and contracts. So there'd be additional exercises from both federal agencies and our prime sponsors as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
Regent
Mr.
Sviggum,
Chairman,
final?
And I'm asking questions about something I know nothing about, okay? But what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Knudsen or Dockendorf or Paulson, are we not receiving the benefit we ought to be receiving as an institution for being a low-risk auditee? The benefit being maybe less costs of your services or other auditing services. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Regents Sviggum.
We're a low-risk auditee, but we still do all these other audits for research and for higher education scholarships. So we're not receiving any benefit for being a low-risk auditee. Is that correct?
Ms. Knudsen.
Regent Sviggum, I would, that is accurate, and it is certainly something we can talk, and we've talked about over the last, handful of years. So certainly would be a conversation we're open to. We have essentially followed what we've been engaged to audit, and that includes research and development because of just obviously the high number of dollars that moves through all of those grants, as well as the risk associated with research and development.
Hundreds of millions of dollars, I understand, but
Absolutely. Yep.
and maybe I'm asking questions I shouldn't ask. It's something I don't know nothing about, but, if I'm a low-risk auditee, I want the benefit of being that too. I want the benefit of a performance.
Absolutely.
Regent Sviggum, I don't think that you're asking questions you shouldn't ask. If you got a question, I think you should ask it. What I think we can maybe do in response to the question is get a sense of what exactly, these sort of the combination of the exercise, the effort that goes into it, the additional cost that goes into it, and then we can actually have a conversation about where we are because of the sustained success. But we can get that information back to you and the rest of the members of the committee and maybe sort of line the conversation up that moves us forward in the direction that you're suggesting. I think that's a good question. Regent Powell, did you have?
I do.
Comment, please.
Thanks, Chair Rocha. So just a question on alternative investments. I know that's always a focus area. And I'm wondering if you would just maybe briefly comment. I think the issue there is valuation. If you could just comment on briefly on what you actually do, to confirm that those things are valued the right way. And then the second question is, do you, as part of the audit, take a point of view on the risk profile of the overall investment portfolio, or is it really is the focus really more on proper valuation? I don't think that we have an inappropriate risk portfolio, but if you were at an institution that you discovered, gosh, they're heavily weighted towards a certain kind of high risk investment, is that something that would come out in the audit, or is it really just a focus on valuation?
Sure.
Ms. Knudsen.
Thank you, Regent Powell, Chair Rocha. So let me take your second question first. 50% of the university's investments are in alternative investments. What that means is that they're difficult to value. They're not traded on a stock exchange, right? It's not like being invested in Apple. We don't comment on sort of the risk profile of the investments per se. In the financial statements, they're bucketed from sort of low risk to higher risk, and you see that in the footnotes. And we are comfortable with the way that those are categorized. I will provide perspective that higher education institutions, it is not uncommon for 50% of the portfolio to be in alternative investments. The same thing for very large not-for-profit hospital institutions, healthcare, things of that nature, really to increase sort of the income stream of a not-for-profit institution. So it's very common. As it relates to our procedures, we're very focused on broadly taking a step back, the OIB's process around due diligence to start. So the process that they go through to decide to make an investment, and then Regent Powell, to your point, we're focused on valuation and their ability to understand those organizations and how those organizations value themselves. One important step that we get is audited financial statements of each of those funds or organizations that they invest in. We get audited financial statements, and then a lot of times those dates are prior to June 30th. So they're as of December 31st or March 31st. They're a lot of times as of a different year. And so then we're also focused on the university's ability to get comfortable that from the audit to the university's year end that there hasn't been a significant change in value, and that's through the due diligence. The last thing that we do is we benchmark the returns of the portfolio within sort of industry, right? So one is timber. For example, there are some timber-related companies. We use independent information to see how that industry is performing, and we benchmark that against the university's performance to make sure that it's in line with what we would expect. And then, of course, internal controls around that in the process. So it's a very robust process because of the risk associated with it and the risk associated with valuation.
Thank you. And we did take off a little late. I was hoping to make up the time in the air, but we have a connecting flight with mission fulfillment. So if we can move on to our next items with your presentation, we're sitting at about 15 minutes left.
Sure.
I'd like to save a few for...
Members of the committee, Chair Rocha, I'll work from the actual report included in your document materials, so please refer to the report titled External Auditor Review and Summary of External Auditor Relationships and Services Provided. It starts on page 136 of the docket materials. I will be brief, as Deloitte covered most of the engagements that we engaged them for. This report here covers the third year of the 4-year contract period that we have with Deloitte. The report also covers, as Judy covered, the audit of the consolidated financial statements, the 2 compliance audits, the single audit being one of them, and the Minnesota Office of Higher Education audit, otherwise known as the OHE audit for all of the campuses, as well as the NCAA agreed upon procedures for Twin Cities. In terms of quality, all the services were performed by Deloitte as agreed upon, and the team did an excellent job in providing those services. The lead audit engagement partner and the team were accessible to the university. They devoted the right amount of time and resources to the engagement and discussed respective audit plans and related risks with the university management team. They met the agreed upon performance criteria and then provided both feedback to us and received feedback from us in areas for opportunities for improvement going forward. In terms of fees, the fees were less than quoted and budgeted by just under $2,900 for the fiscal 2019 engagements. Deloitte also performed 2 other audit-like services. They do the routine consent procedures related to any bond offerings that the university has. And then they also performed agreed-upon procedures related to an evaluation of cost recovery of supplies and quality control testing for the manufacturing of an investigational drug product. That's the cost recovery analysis that they do for us is required by the FDA, and that was done at the request of the Department of Pediatrics. Again, all services for both of those 2 engagements were as agreed upon, and the Deloitte team did an excellent job in providing those services. In summary, we had 2 other audit engagements with 1 other audit firm. Or audit-like engagements with 1 other audit firm. Clifton, Larson, and Allen assisted the university, specifically the Office of the Vice President for Research, with costing models, and they also assisted with the Center for Farm Management in their Phase 2 assessment of the readiness for a SOC 2 examination related to some software that they have in the Center for Farm Management. And both of those engagements were completed as engaged and within the budgets that were allowed for those 2 engagements. So in summary, for all the audit and audit-like services provided both by Deloitte as well as other audit firms, the total was $706,000 in total fees for FY19 engagements.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? And if any were to arise, we certainly can present them to the Chief Auditor's Office and Ms. Paulson and get those answered at that point. With that, we are prepared to move to our next item. So
Yep,
if we
we'll
could
invite Deloitte back up.
invite Deloitte, Ms. Dockendorf and Ms. Knudsen, if you'd care to rejoin us. And we're moving to the external audit plan for discussion. Proceed when you're ready.
Well, I am confident we'll be able to make up some time because we've talked about many of these things in our last presentation. So as I mentioned, we're going to be presenting our fiscal 2020 client service plan for the university. This will be for the June 30th, 2020 audit and audit engagements. We'll start our work later this spring, and as I mentioned, we're working towards an accelerated timeline, which we'll talk about. The scope of our audit for 2020 is substantially the same. There are a couple of things that I'll just highlight. Judy mentioned about the NCAA agreed upon procedures that are required for all Division I schools on an annual basis. The smaller campuses away from the Twin Cities campus are required on a rotational basis. Crookston is every 3 years, and we will be picking up that in our scope this year to meet that reporting requirement. And then there is a regenerative medicine agreed upon procedure that is for sort of reporting under a grant that we have done historically, and we do that every other year. So that, again, comes into our scope this year. This is I won't, because we're behind, I won't spend a lot of time, but the Deloitte way is essentially how we go about our audit every single year. It is a risk assessment process. We really focus on risk and focus our efforts on areas of higher risk, and then utilize technology in a big way to deliver our services. There's a couple of unique platforms we have. The Deloitte Way, or our Omnia platform, is our transformed audit approach that really leverages technology to seamlessly deliver our work. So that includes everything. I talked about project management because of the complexities of our work and the different pieces that we touch. Project management is very, very important. We use a online secure portal called Deloitte Connect that we work very closely with Ms. Paulson's team to ensure that we're staying, on track from a project management perspective. We're getting the information that we need, and that it's secure and confidential. The other thing that I will say is it also helps for future years, because you can look back on what was provided historically and really, makes it so that we're not starting from scratch each year. We also talked about alternative investments. One of the things we introduced a couple of years ago is an iConfirm portal. We go out and we confirm the holdings of the university, but we also gather audited financial statements. That's all done through this iConfirm portal, where the university authorizes us to reach out to these individuals, and they can submit their information again confidentially to us. I won't spend a lot of time on our significant risks. They're unchanged from last year that Judy just mentioned. It is, again, alternative investments because of the high degree of alternatives that are in your portfolio. And then, as Judy mentioned, management override of controls is a significant risk for every single one of our audits. There's nothing in particular for the university, but it is something that we're always focused on, and just make sure that from an internal control structure perspective that we're comfortable that the right controls are in place. I talked about the audit timeline being accelerated. I would say big picture, what we're talking about is accelerating our work by about 6 weeks, which the university is currently working within their own internal departments to try to achieve that timeline. We've already had a handful of planning meetings to really talk tactically about what that means, because it's a lot of effort to move up both the close process as well as our work by 6 weeks. So you can imagine the amount of planning and effort that needs to go into that. But the positive to me is just the timeliness of financial information available to the university and to this group on a go-forward basis. The last thing I will touch, the remainder of the information in here is appendices, is that there is a pretty significant accounting standard that will be new to the university for fiscal 2021. So it is coming up in the next couple of years. For-profit organizations have already adopted this standard, which essentially brings leases onto your balance sheet. So there is a view that leases are a financing transaction, and historically, the majority of leases, operating leases, were just reported on the income statement as you paid, sort of rented the asset. Now you will need to put on your balance sheet a lease obligation and the value of that leased asset, or as an intangible asset, on your balance sheet. So it is a very significant undertaking. The university obviously has a significant number of leases, and it will increase both the assets and liabilities on the university's balance sheet. We had one of our experts out to meet with the university earlier this year, and we'll continue to work very closely with the university as they move forward to adopt GASB 87. That won't necessarily impact our audit this year, but it is something that is not an insignificant lift for the university. With that, any questions on our 2020 plan, or any additional questions that you may have?
I open it to the committee members, student representatives, administration. Anybody have questions or comments? I think that's good. I do see a kind of a connection between the three reports that were just provided, and maybe we can then sort of refine the questions that had come up as it builds into the plan going forward, and so that we have a clear understanding. But thank you very much for the work and being with us today and the responses. And unless there are any other questions or comments?
Chair Rocha.
Regent Shu, please.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. I was just wondering if I could ask a quick question.
Certainly.
And the question is, does the NCAA work cover Title IX on any of our campuses?
Chair Rocha, Regent Chu, this is Judy Dockendorf. Not specifically, no. So it's really focused just on how where revenues are coming in, where expenditures are going, but no specific Title IX procedures.
Regent Shu?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rocha. Then where do we get that information? Is that just special audits that specifically involve Title IX?
Chief Auditor Klatt, would you like to field this?
No.
I would need more information about your question, Regent Shu.
Regent Shu, if I can try to encapsulate, so I think what he's looking for is sort of NCAA regulatory compliance as part of this audit, as opposed to the other types of controls, and I think that your presumption in the second statement is probably accurate, that there's a different process for getting at those types of audits for compliance within that context. But I will work with Chief Auditor Klatt, and we'll get you a more fulsome answer to that question, if that is acceptable, Regent Shu. Chief Auditor Klatt, Chief Auditor Klatt would like to make a comment.
So Regent Shu, we do formal compliance audits, NCAA compliance audits in the individual athletic areas, and part of that review is looking at Title IX from equity standpoint, and that each sport gets the same types of benefits and services, et cetera, et cetera. So from that standpoint, we cover it in those compliance audits, which we do routinely. But if you're talking Title IX in other like discriminatory allegations, that would be handled out of equal opportunity. If it's an actual investigative type of activity. So I'm just not sure which aspect of Title IX you're particularly concerned about.
Regent Kenyanya.
This is on a different topic, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Okay, not something that's come up, but as part of our planning conversation earlier in the week, we spoke briefly about the length of the engagement with Deloitte, and you talked about, you kind of helped the chair and I understand the market, and I had that question specifically about how we've managed the independence. I thought that was very helpful for us to hear. Could you briefly share that with the other committee members?
Certainly.
Chief Auditor Klatt. Well, hold on one second. Do we?
Want to do it now or later?
Well, I say, are we, in relation to the presentation, because otherwise I think we probably can say thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're certainly welcome to stay and listen. But thank you so much for your presentation. That was excellent. Thank you. And I will turn it over to Chief Auditor Klatt to respond specifically to Regent Kenyanya's question. Or do you want to take a quick swipe as we're running out of time on the final internal audit update and then close with that commentary? Would that be acceptable, Regent Kenyanya?
Whenever it fits in, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Chief Auditor Klatt, the floor is yours as you wish.
All right. Well, we'll go through my report, and then I'll come back, and I think I can address what Regent Kenyanya is interested in just a couple minutes. So our report for the committee's communication is on page 168 of your docket material. I would begin by starting with our follow-up results, which in this reporting period, we had a 23% implementation rate, which is below our desired 40%, and is lower than our previous last two reporting periods. To put some context around that, however, in the last report, in the audits that were issued in the last period, we added 27 recommendations to our total. And so those recommendations, this was the first follow-up review that was performed, and that's over 40% of the total outstanding. And it's fairly uncommon, although not impossible, but fairly uncommon for units to actually complete and fully implement something in the first reporting period. 31% of the outstanding of the recommendations that have not been implemented are not past their due date. So we wouldn't necessarily have the expectation that they would be implemented. But having said that, 46% are past due. And so there is a certain warning sign on that. We went through all the status of all the outstanding recommendations, item by item, among my management team to really think about the remediation that they have either taken or not taken. And as our report indicates on page 170, we actually do believe that all the units are making satisfactory progress on implementing their recommendations. In some cases, we think their estimated target dates were a little aggressive considering the amount of work that's involved in remediating particular findings. In other cases, they have gotten to a point of their remediation where they're waiting for something else to occur before they can finalize it. So actually, we think there is a lot of really good work being done, and while it's 23%, I would just say, having done this for many, many years, I would not get overly concerned about that at this particular point in time. The president did ask us, because we shared the results with her cabinet, the president did ask us to accelerate. 6 weeks must be the good new norm here, because she asked us to accelerate our follow-up work by 6 weeks so that the information would be made available much earlier so she can and her leadership team can be responsive to it before we finalize it and wrap it up for reporting to the audit committee. And so we will do that in the next reporting period. We modified our follow-up reporting to the board to try to simplify it, and we thought, anyway, in retrospect, we now have identified there's a couple pieces of information we took off that now we're going to put back on because we think it's relevant. And that's how many recommendations did these units start with? Because maybe they started with 15 and they're down to 1. That's different than there's 1 and they're still working on that 1. So we want to be able to give credit to the units that, they've made progress. It's not like, even though they have something outstanding, that they're not being responsive to it. And the second is to identify which units are in their first time follow-up reporting. Because again, it's not uncommon that they're not going to complete implementation in that first period. So we'll do that, and that will give the committee additional information to, make your assessment about responsiveness to the audit work. But at this point, I personally am not concerned that that's the case. And if I was, I would tell you that for sure. So that's the follow-up. Any question on that?
Regent Powell.
Well, Chair Rocha, if it's appropriate, I have a couple of comments on two of the audits that have been forwarded to us over the last several months.
With the indulgence of the committee, we're about 3 over right now. We got a quarter after start time on the next committee, and they need prep. So can you do them in a minute each, and then I know that's going to short a little bit of the response, but can you do that?
I can do them very well.
All yours, Regent Powell.
Thank you. Just thank you for all the good work. And there were two things that really stood out. I mean, one, in the emergency management and continuity of operations report, building emergency plans for most buildings are either outdated, incomplete, or non-existent. Mm-hmm. That really caught my eye. Mm-hmm. And it goes straight to the heart of safety, which is a top enterprise risk for us. And so you caught it. Obviously, it's been highlighted. I'm really concerned about it. I think we need to hear as a committee that it's been addressed. The second one is disaster recovery of info systems, not fully prepared to restore all systems in the event of a disaster. That also really caught my eye. I mean, this place lives on IT, and we need to be fully prepared. again, obviously you caught it, you've highlighted it, you're on it, but both of those to me are really super critical for this institution. That's it, thanks.
And Regent Powell, they're both very interconnected. Both have to work well and in concert with each other, because if our disaster recovery operations is making one set of assumptions and plans around those assumptions, and our continuity of operations people, who are the business people, are making different assumptions about what IT can do to get those systems back up, it's not going to work. So, and that was the primary finding of both those audits, which is why we issued them kind of as a package, was that governance, coordinated governance between those two, and they report in different reporting lines. So to have better coordination of the governance of those operations is important to make sure that our response can be seamless, because right now it's not.
Thank you.
And so that was my last part about audits issued. We issued 5, and I was going to highlight those 2. So thank you, Regent Powell.
And I apologize. This is all great stuff, and we don't meet as frequently, and our meeting's relatively short. But because Regent Kenyana's question, I think, is really important, and the answer is a great one. But elevator ride response, and we can maybe plus it up in other ways, Regent Kenyana. Do you want to reframe the question, or do you want to just take off with it?
Yep, I have it. So Regent Kenyana, for the benefit of the other members of the committee, we did have a conversation about the Deloitte engagement just in our prep meeting for this, because there was a lot around Deloitte. And as Controller Sue Paulson mentioned, we are in the third year of a 4-year contract. So it's going to come up to a point where we're going to have conversations about rebidding that audit contract, et cetera. It used to be a practice of the university to rebid every 5 years on audit contracts for the purpose of opening up the opportunity for firms to be able to be engaged in the use of public funds and all that. And that was a really common practice for many, many years. But with the advent of the constriction of the external audit market, there just absolutely is not much competition in that market anymore. And so we've gone from the Big 12 to the Big 10 to the Big 8, and now we're down to the Big 4 accounting firms. And in the Twin City market, 3 of those 4 firms don't have higher education expertise. And so if you engage them, they bring in folks from other offices, and it can work, but it's certainly not as good as having your expertise, 6 blocks down the street. And so we have organizationally not rebid as often as 5 years. There's certainly benefits to the continuity of the external auditor. The one risk you have if you don't rebid on a frequent basis is around their independence. And most institutions and organizations are dealing with that in looking at their partner rotation and making sure that partner rotates. And we have had partner rotation with Deloitte in the relatively recent past. And so it's just things to be aware of as we think about, what's the purpose of rebidding? Is it to go out and check the marketplace to see if you're getting a good deal? Is it to provide access to public funds for other firms that might be interested? And then what type of firm is the university comfortable in engaging to perform the audit work within the institution? So just things to be thinking about, because again, we're in year 3 of 4 years, and so it'll be around the corner.
Excellent. Thank you. Seeing no further business before the committee, motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor?
Sorry, we
You're
took
adjourned.
some of our break.